this afternoon. I just want to say that I'm really grateful to every member of the panel for being here this afternoon to field all these questions, because I was around in several of the groups and there was some quite passionate discussion going on and still a lot of questions to be answered. And please, I think this afternoon, it's a reality that you will walk away with questions unanswered. Okay, but these particular people who are up here today are probably available in some way, especially CCLI and Word of Life, for you to be asking questions of down the track anyway. So it's not your final opportunity to get some clarity. So I just want to introduce you to the panel. Well, we've got Malcolm Walker from CCLI. We heard from Malcolm this morning, so thank you, Malcolm, for being with us on the panel. And Fiona Loader, who's our copyright expert here today. I keep saying that, Fiona, you can believe it's Fiona. And Mark Beckwith from Word of Life. And we've also got a representation from our publishers and from our APM community, and Monica O'Brien. Now, Monica is the Managing Director and Publisher of Willow Publishing, who is the publisher of As One Voice, the As One Voice music collection. So I think everyone will be familiar with that. She herself is a writer of liturgical, catechetical and general music. And Monica is passionate about supporting Australian composers. And she spent the last 25 years championing their talent both locally and abroad. So I'd like you to just welcome the panel, particularly Monica, because we're going to mention today. You're kind of sitting in your group somewhere, or somebody's got the questions for your group ready to go. I just need to know where you are. So the people who've got the questions, can you put your hands up? Right, I'm going to come around in some kind of order, so if I walk past, grab me, okay? I don't want to miss any group at all, all right? Okay, here we go. All right, Cassandra, thank you.
Our group asked these questions, they've got several actually. The first one is, if you have 2 original copies of a hymn, how many copies can you make for the choir?
Mark, would you like to answer that?
Have you got a license?
Yes. Well, I'd like to.
You can make any,
If I said Mark.
providing that we cover that particular title.
We didn't hear.
No, I didn't.
So the question was, if you own 2 originals,
Yeah.
how many copies can you make? This lady's talking about full music. Yep. So there's not a limit on what you can make as far as reproduction goes.
Our license is a limited license in the sense that we have category A, category B, category C. Category A goes up to 249 copies. So under a category A license, you're allowed to make up to 249 copies of the work. Category B goes up to 499 copies. Most churches that we license have a category A, and then we go up to 249. Some of the larger churches go up in category B, and then you get some extraordinary where you'll find a church that says they want to make 5,000, 2,000 copies, and we license them accordingly. And it is a per copy based license.
Okay, thanks. Just follow to the mic. Thank you. Dan, would you like to stand up? Yeah. So we've only got one mic, so we have to work for it.
I'll speak loudly. Good. Okay. To Word of Life, what happens if there's a failure to report? Will the licence be cancelled?
No, the licence won't be cancelled. They'll get a letter saying that they haven't reported and they must do so. If they find difficulty doing this, then they are to contact us.
My question, or our question, was mine. Adapting music. I'm in a situation where I learned to play the organ, but reading right, left, pedal. And a lot of music is written for the organ on 2 staffs, and I can't read that. So I write an adaptation. I also have students that want to play at Mass, but they cannot play from the printed copy. It has to be adapted to their level. And the same thing too, often organ music is disgusting on a piano, and piano music is disgusting on an organ. And it has to be adapted, otherwise you end up with this woo down there and no pedal line coming through. So my question is, are we allowed to make those adaptations?
I would say just generally speaking, not talking about anyone's licenses outside of that, if you're doing something that, say you had the piano score, you wanted to work it on the organ, normally to determine whether it's an adaptation requiring licensing or not, if you can just write down the organ stops or whatever it is that you need to do on the score.
No, it's actually pushing
Yeah.
and that. It's nothing to do with stops.
Okay, but if it's something that requires re-notating the music, it's more likely, and especially if you're actually changing the music itself, like adding extra lines for the pedals or changing the harmonies or something, it is an
Not
adaptation.
normally harmonies.
What I'm getting at is,
Yeah.
it's
It's just so they can
re-
actually
If
play
it's
it.
something where you have to re-score the whole thing, it's more likely that you're going to need permission.
Yeah.
If it's something where you're just putting something on the original music saying, I'll play this on the so-and-so instrument in the first manual or whatever, I'm not an organist, I'm a pianist, so. But you can see what I'm getting at. If it's something that's major, something that's going to change the essence of the music, you're going to need permission to do it. If it's something, I'll give an example, in orchestral work, if you didn't have any violas and you had to transcribe the viola part for violin, but it's still the same notes that are being played on a pretty similar instrument. In most cases, publishers would say that's absolutely fine. We don't really regard that as a change of the essence of the music. But if you're changing the whole scoring of the work, then it
You
is.
simplify it all. You keep the harmony, you keep the spirit, but you have to simplify it because they either physically you can't stretch to
The other thing is if
being
you're-
properly performed, or the child just doesn't have the ability. So it's transcribing.
If it's transcribing it exactly,
No, well, it can't
It's
be
not.
because then you may as well just give them the music and then they struggle. Question, yeah, please.
I would say that, well, from a few publishers that I've spoken to overseas, if there's nothing available, then they don't mind so much because they're not losing anything because they didn't actually provide it.
You still have the
if you're
original.
not, and if you're not changing the progression, the natural progression of the song, so you're not actually adapting it, you're actually reinventing it, if you like, for a
Yeah.
different instrument that's not available at the point, then they wouldn't, I don't think, worry too much about it in the respect that it's not available anyway. So you're not actually reproducing their particular work, you're reinventing it from your perspective, but trying to keep the natural progression of the song. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a tricky one.
Yeah, I mean, we've actually had this ongoing discussion globally with publishers as to really what an adaptation really is in regards to sheet music. And publishers really do see an adaptation of a work if you're changing it from their original published structure. So if you are simplifying it, you are rearranging notes, you are doing things, that really is an adaptation. And so therefore an adaptation does require permission. Under our licensing, we actually allow for adaptations where there's no published version available. So that's really where, again, we just ask for that to be reported because you have copies of someone else's work. So it really does come down to, people start to go, what if I just change one note? Well, then you start to get into, how much of a change is an adaptation? All we fundamentally say is that if you're changing the work, and if you're changing it to suit a different instrument, you're changing it to suit a totally different way it needs to be played, even down to simplifying it, then typically that's treated as an adaptation. The publisher would want you to use their version. If they have a published version available, you would go out to the shop and buy the music for the harp, or the music for the, however, I know there's a lot of publishers that don't publish harp music. So therefore, it becomes an adaptation, and then you, and it's usually under licensing, you have the freedom to do that.
Okay, thanks for that, everyone.
Can I
Can I
just
just
add
move on? Yep, sorry, yeah.
So I was going to say, we have some guidelines called the Practical Guide to Print Music in Australia, and we have a list of AMCOS publishers that we've granted licenses, free licenses for things things that go beyond what's allowed under the Copyright Act. And one of those things is, as I was giving an example, the orchestral thing where you reallocate. Yeah, so that is a bit more generous than the law allows. But it's on behalf of our host pages.
Thank you. Can we